Berrier, in your prepared testimony, you describe chemical and biological threats from Russia and North Korea in particular, but also China. Can you broadly characterize chemical and biological threats? Are they significant? Are there trends that you can share? Is the threat increasing or decreasing, for example?
Senator, what I can say in open testimony is that those countries that were mentioned in the assessment do have active programs. We monitor those very, very carefully in a number of sensitive ways, and we've actually seen the Russians use some of their latest weapons on individuals recently. So we can go into more detail in a closed session.
Okay. It also notes that China's chemical infrastructure and Russia's pharmaceutical-based agents program can provide those nations with chemical and biological capabilities, respectively. Can you talk a bit more about the dual-use nature of an industrial capability and how that can also support a military capability?
Senator, the dual-use nature of some of those technologies to produce pharmaceuticals and chemical and biological weapons are intertwined very closely, and it's sometimes difficult to discern the real true intent behind some of those facilities. But beyond that, I can go into more detail in the closed session.
Also, sir, in your prepared testimony, you note that Russia has restarted production of long-range missile delivery platforms, that they are fielding ultra-quiet cruise missile submarines, and they are investing heavily in hypersonic weapons. What is your overall assessment of Russia's long-range conventional strike capabilities? And is this a reflection of a desire or a strategy that involves holding the homeland at risk below the threshold of nuclear conflict?
Senator, the Russians can hold the U.S. homeland at risk below that threshold. They have invested heavily in modernizing a number of niche capabilities and weapons that you mentioned, and they continue to develop those weapons, even in a constrained financial environment. And the hydrocarbon market at its lower rate continues to challenge their ability to fund their programs.
Director Haines, do you have anything to add on these points?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Now I'd like to recognize Senator King via WebEx.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Haines, I'd like to ask you a question I ask pretty much every foreign policy leader that we have before this committee. What is your analysis of what China's goals are? What does China want?
Thank you, Senator. Well, obviously, I'm not here as a foreign policy analyst, but regardless, I'm happy to give you a sense of how the analysts perceive it. I think, as a general matter, China sees itself as rising and sees the United States as declining and is not interested in going to war, but perceives that as a concern as these trajectories, from their perspective, pass each other in a sense. And in that context, China believes that the United States is trying to check China's rise, and in that context is countering, from their perspective, again, what they perceive to be our influence and our efforts in this area. I think in their perception, they are increasingly perceiving it as a zero-sum game, and that promotes, in a sense, their efforts to really push us out in a way, and to be a threat across a range of factors and see us as a threat to them in that context.
Let me change the subject. To what extent, and you mentioned this in your opening testimony and in your written statement, expand a bit on climate change as a national security concern. The one I'm particularly concerned about is incipient migration from areas of the world that become essentially uninhabitable because of drought, famine, extreme heat. Do you see this as a threat multiplier, as a serious national security concern, as well as, of course, an environmental concern?
I do, absolutely. I mean, I think part of the challenge for us is recognizing that climate change has just enormous impact in every aspect of our lives and with respect to almost every threat that we're facing, is figuring out how to actually embed and integrate climate science and analysis essentially across the board of our intelligence community work so that we can ensure that we're actually lifting up the places where it's in fact having that kind of impact. So to your point, without question, the impact the climate is having on migration is something that we've written about within the intelligence community, the trend lines that produces, the concerns that creates. Another example is in the context of increased drought and sort of the shifting boundaries of dry areas. What you see is that affects agriculture, that in turn creates tension that can drive conflict, for example. That's another aspect of it. You see increasing floods. That's obviously a challenge for countries around the world, particularly ones that don't have the resilience to react to them in a way that allows them to continue, and can actually promote fractures of society as a consequence over time. So there's so many different aspects and dimensions to this challenge, and what we've been trying to do is ensure that we can actually bring in that expertise and integrate it effectively and make it available across the community so that we can integrate that work into our daily work in effect, while also looking at the long-term trends that it produces.
And of course, historically, access to arable land has been the cause of wars throughout our history. We've pivoted largely from a focus on terrorism to peer and near-peer state competition, and I understand that, and I think that's appropriate. I'm still concerned, however, about the terrorist threat, and the particular one that keeps me up at night is terrorist access to a nuclear device, either through development or more likely through purchase. Deterrence has protected us from a nuclear conflict for 70 years. Deterrence wouldn't work with a terrorist organization. Talk to me about the role of intelligence in protecting us from the nightmare of a nuclear weapon in the hold of a tramp steamer bound into the port of New York or Miami.
Yeah, absolutely, Senator. And I know you know a fair amount about how we work on these issues, particularly given your role on the Intelligence Committee. I would say that part of the effort in, as you say, the rebalance, in effect, recognizing the rise of state-to-state competition is not taking your eye off the ball of non-state actor and transnational threats, including terrorism. And that is absolutely something that we're committed to. And in the context of, in particular, terrorist groups, we monitor and try to track them to the best degree that we can. It's a diffuse issue, as you know, spanning many regions of the globe. We are, in particular, looking for the kinds of weapons that they can use that give them extraordinary capacity to have catastrophic effects. And we look to ensure that we understand those networks as best we can and then provide whatever warning we're capable of providing under the circumstances. I think beyond that, we can obviously talk further in closed session.
Thank you. I think the attackers on September 11th killed 3,000 people. They would have killed 3 million if they could have. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. And now via WebEx, Senator Cotton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Berrier, you stated in your testimony submitted ahead of this hearing that we had previously expected China to double their nuclear stockpile by the end of the decade, but both you and Admiral Richard have now testified for the committee that PLA is going to exceed that estimate. Why do you think the PLA is so rapidly building up its nuclear arsenal? Is it to defend its homeland, deter perceived regional threats, or to project power globally?
Senator Cotton, thank you for the question. Broadly speaking, China's rise has also included this massive military modernization. And in the span of capabilities that they have, the nuclear piece has been one component. It has been a priority for them. And I think they have racked and stacked that in the things that they think that they need to get done by 2030 or 2035. And so I think they have accelerated this as a deterrent, quite honestly.
Why do you state that the Chinese government tends to keep its nuclear forces in a launch on warning posture? And how is that a change from previous assessments of China's nuclear forces?
Senator Cotton, I think the Chinese military, through their modernization and training efforts, have undergone a lot of exercises where they try to understand what gives them the most viable capability the quickest. And I think this is an evolution of their training and doctrine.
Is China capable of arming its hypersonic glide vehicles with nuclear warheads? And if so, what kind of risk does that pose to the United States and our interests?
The answer to that question is yes, and that poses a significant risk.
Could you explain why it poses that significant risk?
The speed at which those weapons travel makes it very, very difficult to track in their entire trajectory. We could go into more detail, Senator, in a closed session.
As compared to a traditional ballistic missile?
Correct.
Okay, let's turn to Russia. You testified in your written statement that Russia now claims to have modernized over 80% of its own nuclear triad, including silent submarines, new strategic bombers, and an upgraded ICBM force. How does the Russian ICBM force now compare to that of the United States in terms of modernization?
Senator, I'd prefer to discuss that in a closed session.
Okay. Have the Russians created or fielded a hypersonic glide vehicle that's capable of matching up to a nuclear warhead?
Senator, they're in the process of doing that right now.
That pose the same risks that China's hypersonic glide vehicles, if armed with nuclear weapons, would, correct?
Yes.
Well, we're on the topic of Russia. In 2019, General Ashley indicated that Russia is violating the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And last year, the Department of State reported that China may be doing the same. General, do you agree that it's important that we collect against and evaluate and inform our policymakers about our adversaries' adherence to or violation of international arms control agreements?
Senator, yes, I do.
And do you assess that Russia and China are violating the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty?
Senator, I would like to take that question for the record and get back to you.
Director Haines, do you have an opinion on that point?
Thank you, Senator. I think I don't believe that the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty is in force, but like General Berrier, I think it would be better for us to take it for the record and provide you a comprehensive answer.
Okay. Thank you both. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Let me now recognize Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the witnesses being here today. Director Haines, congratulations on your confirmation. General, good to see you again, as always. Let me begin with a kind of a basic question. Director, do you track communications between private citizens and known terrorists?
Senator, I think there are obviously parts of the intelligence community that do track communications that may be between terrorists and individual citizens.
By his own admission, as a private citizen, former Secretary of State John Kerry communicated several times with the Foreign Minister of Iran, the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. Do you know what happened in any of those calls or communications?
Thank you, Senator. No, I was not privy to any of those calls.
Maybe getting communications or readout of those calls from the intelligence community, I think would be helpful given the current controversies that are surrounding those communications with one of our biggest enemies and biggest state sponsor of terrorism. So I'd like to follow up with the intel community on that. Let me ask another question. You and I spoke a lot about, during your confirmation process, the prospects of the United States becoming the world's energy superpower again, producing more oil than Saudi Arabia, more natural gas than Russia, more renewables than any other country, all of the above energy. Do you believe that status as the world's energy superpower, a net exporter now of energy, degrades or enhances our national security?
Thank you, Senator. I think we did discuss this, and if I recall correctly, you were looking at this question through the lens of whether or not, through our pursuit of renewables and so on, that might actually create challenges or change our...
I had asked, and you had answered yes, that being the world's energy superpower helps us.
Absolutely. Our natural resources, including our energy piece, help us.
Do you agree with that, General? Being a net exporter of energy helps the United States' national security and foreign policy.
Senator, I don't really have an opinion on that.
These are not hard questions. Come on. Of
it's
course,
not really
the answer
defense
is yes.
intelligence.
What? Excuse me.
I said it's not really related to defense intelligence or threats, so I'm not comfortable answering that question.
You don't think that whether we're an energy exporter or importer affects threats to the United States? Is that what you're saying as the head of DIA?
No, what I'm saying is our area of expertise is foundational military intelligence about the threats that our country faces. I don't study the export of energy.
Okay. Let me ask this. Do you believe being a net importer of energy enhances or degrades China's national security? Director.
Thank you, Senator. Honestly, it is not something that I have studied deeply, but I would imagine that their export of energy under certain circumstances is a help. And at the same time, obviously, they'll want to use a fair amount domestically as well, and it would depend on the particular circumstances of what it is that you're looking at.
Here's a article for the record, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to submit it. It's from the Global Times. This is the Communist Party of China's mouthpiece.
Without exception.
U.S. status as net exporter of oil reminds China of energy disadvantages. So the Chinese Communist Party clearly thinks being a net importer of energy creates disadvantages, and they even mention it here that the United States as a net exporter, it helps the United States national security. So the Chinese Communist Party believes that. I certainly hope our intel communities can just say it definitively, that whether it's DIA or the DNI, that being a net exporter of energy, all of the above energy, enhances our national security and foreign policy. Director, you told me that during our confirmation process. I'd just like you to definitively state it here. The reason I'm doing this is we are undertaking policies right now, the Biden administration, to restrict the production of American energy unilaterally. We are importing more Russian oil right now than we have ever before. Is that good or bad for our national security from your perspective relative to our relationship with Russia?
So with respect, Senator, I'm not trying to be obtuse. It's just that, honestly, I think it depends on the particular circumstances. And as a representative of the intelligence community, what I try very hard to do is provide you with what analysts assess with respect to particular situations and give you that assessment so that it can help your decision making. If you wish to provide us a question for the record about some aspect of our energy piece and how that affects foreign actors, by all means, we will absolutely do our best to answer it.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Sullivan. Senator Tuberville, if you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. Director Haines, you made a statement a few minutes ago that China is looking at us as declining. Would you clarify that?
Thank you, Senator. Just clarify it in the sense that...
Declining. You said China is looking at us as basically a declining nation. Could you clarify that?
Sure. Leadership has made various public statements that indicate that they see the United States as a declining power. It's obviously not what I believe, but that is their perception.
Okay,
Right.
Thank you. You know, many throw around the stat that U.S. spends more on defense than the next 10 or 12 countries combined. Yes or no? Is that correct, General?
We spend a lot on defense, Senator.
Director Haines? Thank you. Xi Jinping cements power in the CCP. How concerned are you that he's surrounded by yes men? And General Berrier, based on your intelligence, does this raise the threat level for a miscalculation, especially with regard to Taiwan?
Senator, I think Xi is firmly in control of the party, of the military, and every aspect of Chinese society.
We've had several generals tell us that they know for a fact he has yes men around him and implemented that. Does that concern you, though? I mean, is that different than has been in the past? Other dictators?
Senator, I will take that for the record and come back to you.
Okay, thank you. Director Haines, has North Korea taken any concrete steps toward complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization at all that we know of?
No, sir.
Thank you. You said a few minutes ago that there was an impact in climate change in other countries across the world that's causing migration. What countries are those?
Senator, we produced reports from the Office of Director of National Intelligence over, I don't know, I think the last 10 years, and we can make some of those available to you. But what we indicate is that the trend lines are such that over the next several decades, particularly in certain parts of Africa, you'll see climate have an impact on essentially conditions in those countries, in these areas in Africa, that is likely to promote migration across the continent at pretty increased levels, essentially.
But that's been forever, though, right? I mean, it...
No, the climate change is actually accelerating that.
Okay, yeah, okay. It seemed likely, as my colleague Senator King said last week, that a cyber attack will be the first cure to the future of great power conflict. Director Haines, what can the United States do to deter our adversaries from cyber attacks? I mean, what's the best thing that we can do now?
So, Senator, I think this is largely a policy question that our policy folks work on, but I think as a general matter, obviously there are a variety of theories of deterrence. Part of it is indicating red lines, saying if you do this, we will do something that will cost you, essentially, as a consequence, working with coalition partners, allies, to raise the cost, essentially, of taking those actions, also promoting resilience generally so that the effect of their actions are not as damaging as they might otherwise be, variety of things that can be done to create, essentially, a framework of deterrence.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. Now let me recognize via WebEx Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses today for being there. Director Haines, I have a question for you. Pardon me. One of the things that we have seen, and one of the things we know, is that the intelligence community's reports, periodic reports, are helpful when we're trying to quantify threats and prepare for some of these black swan events, which COVID-19 is one of those. So what I would like to know, are there resources, collection methods, authorities that would better and more comprehensively support the work of the intel community's ability to exercise some of this foresight? And I ask this question in regard to Russia and China and some of their participation, and also if there is a way for interagency share on some of these resources and information.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I think we are going to be obviously submitting a budget in the context of the president's budget, and that will indicate, I think, the resources that we're looking for to try to promote the work that we do in this area. And beyond that, I think probably best to leave it to the budget. If there are particular thoughts that you have on things that we can do better in this respect, please don't hesitate to let us know, obviously.
Well, this would need to be things that you all say we're missing or you need more of. And I appreciate General Berrier's statement, and I will come to you with this part of the question. When we look at China and Russia and how they have expanded their security ties, and I would be curious, to what degree do you assess this closeness between Russia and China? And I would add to that Iran and North Korea, and those four comprising a new axis of evil. But in what way do you attribute this to a growing relationship between Putin and Xi, and between the leadership of these countries? And how do you assess these countries' unwillingness, pardon me, to agree to a formal alliance? General, to you.
Senator, thank you for that question. We see some cooperation between China and Russia, and I would say that it is opportunistic and transactional. I think neither country would prefer to have a deep military alliance. It provides them flexibility not to actually have that. There probably is some cooperation between all four of the countries you mentioned on some level, and we can go into more detail on that in the closed session. But if you wouldn't mind, I would like to go back to your question about the pandemic. You may know that DIA has the National Center for Medical Intelligence, and in this
Right.
organization at Fort Detrick, we put analysts and scientists together, and we use a variety of methods, from open source intelligence to sensitive reporting, to try and understand the pandemic and everything that's happened, as well as medical phenomena going on around the world. So that is a unique jewel in the crown for DI and for the IC, quite frankly. I think we have the right authorities in place, and as the director said, in the budget, we'll be looking for continued funding for that center.
Okay, let me ask you this. When we talk about Russia and China and naval cooperation, how do you see this affecting the Indo-Pacific, with Russia having added 15 new warships and support vessels to their Pacific fleet?
So certainly something that we should keep an eye on with our Indo-PACOM partners. Obviously, more forces there requires more intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance assets to keep an eye on it, and we will watch out for additional partnership between PLAN and Russian Navy forces.
And I would also, and this may be better for our closed session, but to know how you assess Russia's geopolitical understanding of or participation in China's Belt and Road Initiative.
I'd be happy to discuss that in a closed session.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Now, let me recognize via WebEx Senator Manchin. Senator Manchin is obviously having some problems communicating. Okay. Apparently, Senator Manchin is not available at this time to WebEx his questions. Since there are no other members seeking recognition, let me thank the witnesses for their testimony in this open session. Immediately upon adjournment of the open session, we'll retire to SVC 217 for a classified briefing on these issues. Again, thank you, Madam Director. Thank you, General. And I will declare the open session adjourned.